Alexandra, great to be with you today. We both serve on the advisory board of Intalcon Foundation, but more importantly, you are a very well-known expert around conservation of oceans. And of course, you follow the legacy of your grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, who has been a great ambassador like you are. What motivates you the most?
Well, Andreas, achieving the UN global goals will only succeed if we all tackle this major task together. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to act as an ambassador for impact for Sustainability Goal 14, which, as you know, is life underwater. Our oceans right now are facing a legion of problems. Unfortunately, SDG 14 is the most underfunded of the UN global goals. But yet, if action is taken to restore the resilience, biodiversity, and abundance of our oceans, it could yield about $10 for every dollar invested. Finding innovative ways to finance the restoration of our oceans beyond traditional philanthropy is going to be really critical to achieving our goals.
Most of us know about ecosystems in poor countries, in developing countries, but maybe you can share with us what the current conditions of our oceans are.
The ocean is the lifeblood of this planet. From the largest animal that ever lived to the tiniest bacteria, marine habitats contain the greatest diversity of life on Earth. So, for example, every other breath that we take comes from the ocean. And more than 1 billion people rely on the oceans for food security every day. More than 3 billion people depend on marine and coastal habitats and the biodiversity that exists there for their livelihoods. As we all know, the oceans today are in severe trouble. So 80% of fisheries are overfished or collapsing. We're suffocating them with more than 5 trillion pieces of plastic. And climate change is bringing increased pressures. The oceans are warming, the ice is melting, the water is acidifying. Populations of different creatures are moving in a search for livable conditions. Vast areas of coral reefs are dying overnight. Our collective impact on the ocean has resulted in the loss of 50% of blue natural capital, which simply means the flora and the fauna that lives in the ocean. So if we continue with business as usual, we can expect to see exponential losses within the next 10 years and reach devastating tipping points in our ocean ecosystem. And I think the big question we need to ask ourselves is, will we shape that change, or will that change shape us? We have about 10 years to shift the paradigms and practices that can set us on a new path to abundance. And it shows us that it's not only possible, but it can increase our health and our prosperity.
The question to you really is, when I hear this, good news, but the question is, what do you intend to achieve? I mean, how do you get there? You mentioned that we should shape it. So how do you get, what do you like to achieve?
Well, Andreas, when my father first started articulating a conservation ethic for the oceans back in the 1960s, we still had 90% of our ocean. So conserving what we had left at the time seemed like an adequate strategy. But today we've lost over half of our oceans. So I think a new approach is needed. And at Oceans 2050, we believe that we need a shift from conservation to restoration, from sustainability to abundance. And that was an idea that was driven home for me when I was at a fisheries symposium in Canada. And chatting with a fisheries scientist about a species that is iconic in the North Atlantic cod, a species that supported Vikings and Native Americans and pilgrims and explorers, that built the wealth of nations and then collapsed in the 1970s due to overfishing, and then again in the 1990s. He mentioned that that stock is now considered a sustainable fishery at just 6% of their historical population. And that shocked me because I realized that this is what sustainability means. So when we think about restoration of abundance, it is a step towards a more abundant future. and away from this idea that we can simply sustain the little that we have left. The return on our investment in restoring abundance to the oceans is actually exponential gain. The risk of business as usual, however, is exponential loss. That is where we stand today. And after 2020, I think everybody can understand the catastrophic implications of exponential curves all too well.
It sounds very interesting, a very interesting approach. Thank you for sharing. And I'm happy to hear optimism in your voice and in your plans. So that's great in these days, especially in these days. Tell me, what's the roadmap to the actions that are necessary on this road of restoration?
Well, what we want to do is turn the story of the loss of the ocean into a story of restoration. It's not enough to preserve what little is left. We really need to work efficiently towards restoring the ocean's richness as it was in my grandfather's time. So that includes protecting species, harvesting wisely, protecting spaces, restoring habitats, reducing pollution, and the most important one of all, mitigating climate change. To be successful, we need to build partnerships and projects that are omni-win, getting away from the typical zero-sum game that we operate in, and align multiple stakeholders with outcomes that are defined by science and integrate technology and innovation.
Very exciting. Thank you. So one of the recovery wedges, and you just touched on it, that are focusing on is seaweed farming. Tell me, how can seaweed farming contribute to the sustainability goals, and why is this project so important for humanity?
For centuries, we've been drawing carbon from the biosphere and putting it into the atmosphere and our oceans, of course. So nature-based solutions focus on reversing that trend. We need to decarbonize the atmosphere and recarbonize the biosphere. Ocean afforestation, so the restoration of marine forests and regenerative aquaculture, this is one of the greatest opportunities to address climate change. And the best part of all is that they can sequester great amounts of carbon. So at Oceans 2050, we're advocating a paradigm for ocean farming that rewards stewardship over exploitation. Regenerative aquaculture contributes to mitigating climate change and provides further valuable ecosystem services. Seaweed farms have the potential to enable millions of profitable businesses while providing raw material commoditization for inputs to plastics, food, fuel, and cosmetics. At Oceans 2050, we've recently launched our seaweed carbon farming project that looks to take cores of sediment from seaweed farms around the world and actually start to quantify the carbon that they've been able to sequester in that sediment. And we have everything from a 300-year-old Japanese farm to newer farms in North America. And it's the first time that globally seaweed farms have come together to understand their benefits and impact for the oceans. And what's exciting to me about regenerative aquaculture is that it can contribute to multiple SDG goals, not just life underwater, but also climate action, gender equality, zero hunger, poverty. It's really an extraordinary opportunity that we have ahead of us.
Maybe the last question, you brought up the relevance of technology, the importance of innovation, and the impact of globalization in our world. Where do you see the opportunities of these trends to contribute to the global goals?
You know, we have an ingenuity gap that we have to bridge if we're going to get to a more abundant future. We have to find ways to exponentiate our solutions. So if we accept that technology is simply a means to amplify our intentions, then innovation, AI, technology, and globalization can become powerful tools to contribute to our common vision of an abundant future. A great example of this is the future of seafood. What is the future of seafood? It can't continue the way that it has been going. And from my perspective, deploying technology to embed traceability and transparency into the global fisheries industry, is the way to feed the world while protecting and restoring our oceans. And that means that we are able to connect the consumer to the producer through the fish markets and the restaurants in a way that makes them all meaningful contributors to a common vision of an abundant future.
Thank you again. Maybe one more question, if I may. I opened our discussion by saying that we both joined the board of Intalcon Foundation, and maybe you'd like to share with us what you like to achieve, having joined the advisory board, what you like to achieve for the SDGs for our oceans.
So I think if together we can bring this idea of ocean restoration, the regeneration of abundance in our oceans to new audiences, whether they're investors or other contributors, corporate actors, policymakers, then we will have a real opportunity to drive that innovation and that investment into these solutions that support restoration. Together, we need to think about the future that we envision and then chart a path forward in that direction. So the question is now, who can really help leverage their ecosystems in that direction? Then we can have great success in the next 10 years that we have left to make this work happen.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Great learning. More importantly, thank you for being such a passionate ambassador and contributor to our world. And thank you for what you have done and what you will do for the biodiversity of our oceans. That's very insightful. And I must say, I'm looking forward to working with you at the board of Intalcon Foundation. Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Andreas, so am I. I think we have so much to look forward to, and I'm excited to get started in 2021.